this was published today in The Lancet. It's a major medical journal about the kind of first reinfection case that we believe might have happened in this country. The long and the short of it was, this is a gentleman, it was a 25-year-old male who's a resident in the state of Nevada. Basically, he presented to health authorities on 2 different occasions with symptoms of COVID, basically. He was diagnosed with COVID in April, and let's see here, and then a second time he was diagnosed with COVID at the end of May, beginning of June. But what you need to know is that he actually, and those were, he was diagnosed by the nasopharyngeal swabs, PCR testing, okay? But he had, he had 2 negative tests in between. So the patient had 2 positive tests for SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, the first on April 18th, the second on June, but they were separated by 2 negative tests done during follow-up in May, which is really, really interesting, okay? So the other thing that they're saying about this is that for this particular gentleman, the second infection that he had of COVID was more severe than the first. I'm not going to go into like all the nitty-gritty details because there's a lot of nitty-gritty details and there's like graphs and charts and all this stuff. But what I will go through is this area that I have highlighted, which I think is an excellent summary, which basically, this study in The Lancet says, they said these findings suggest that this patient was infected by SARS-CoV-2 virus on 2 separate occasions by a genetically distinct virus. That means by, a second time by a second virus. Thus, previous exposure to SARS-CoV-2 might not guarantee total immunity in all cases. Let me break down what that means. And this is why it's important for me to talk about this. There is this question about whether people can be reinfected. Right here, this is the question. People have been wondering about this for a long time anyway. This article suggests that it is possible and that it perhaps has happened. Now, if that is the case, then first of all, it says that, and we should be thinking about, if you've been exposed to COVID-19, had SARS-CoV-2 virus in the past, it might not guarantee that you're totally immune from getting it again in the future, right? That's one of the things that this implies, should this be the case, which is what we are purporting. And what that means is that if you've had COVID in the past, you can't let down your guard. You can't not wear a mask and not social distance and do all the stuff we know, because perhaps previous exposure doesn't necessarily guarantee full immunity. Okay, the other thing is all individuals, whether previously diagnosed with COVID or not, should take precautions to avoid infection, which is kind of what I just said, this idea that we can't let up, we can't give up on this. And the other thing that we have to keep in mind is that, if reinfections are actually possible, it may have some implications for the development of a vaccine. Now, there are a few things we need to keep in mind. There are a lot of things we don't know. Number one, we don't know how widespread, if widespread at all, this concept of reinfection is. We don't know. Was this like a one and done? Was this, is this happening all the time and we're just not finding it? We found it for this guy because we were able to do all the testing to actually prove that we think it happened. Don't know. We don't know how widespread it is because you need swabs, you need all this kind of stuff. We know a lot of people are asymptomatic. So again, we don't really know how often this actually happens or how common this will be. And the other thing is we can't and couldn't, in this particular instance, assess the patient's immune response. Now, he was a healthy person, okay? So they say that, he didn't have sort of any immune compromising conditions. That is very important. But I think that this is a really good start for information to help us build on the future. I keep saying this all the time. There's just so much about COVID that we don't know and that we are literally learning with every single day, guys. So what this means right now is that, yes, we are learning. Yes, it is potentially possible to have reinfection, and this case seems to imply that this might have happened. We don't know how common or widespread this is, if it's common and or widespread at all. It may have some implications on vaccine development. There's a lot of things that are sort of, it's interesting.